When you look in the mirror and you smile at yourself or you see yourself in photos, do you notice that you've got dark, ugly looking fillings in your teeth and that you're a bit embarrassed by them and you don't like how they look? Do you dislike how those metal fillings look in your mouth, and would you like to know what your options are and what you can do about it? Well, if the answer is yes, then getting your amalgam silver coloured fillings replaced may just be what you're looking for. But before you rush off to your dentist to change those fillings over, there are a few things you should know first, because you need to make sure it's done safely. What do I mean it needs to be done safely? What is the risk of getting a filling done? And surely going to the dentist is safe. After all, we're only drilling on a tooth. Well, yes, but it's what's in those fillings that could be of concern. It's what's in those materials that could be an issue to you and your health. So let me explain why. If you've had one or more cavities and you can see a black, silver or grey looking filling, then it's most likely that your tooth was filled with a metal mixture called amalgam. Now, previously, these metal amalgam fillings were the only option we had. So if you're over the age of 30 and you had a cavity, then your mouth is probably still home to one of these old amalgam fillings, especially if you grew up in the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand or Canada, for example. Now, those silver-coloured fillings don't just look unsightly, and they're not actually just silver. They are a mixture of metals, and they contain a heavy metal called mercury. Now, mercury is a toxic heavy metal, and dentistry has been told, and then they tell you that once you combine the mixture of metals into the amalgam, that the mercury is safe. And that is despite the fact that we know a couple of things. We know that that mercury leaks and gases out of the filling, and we also know that as dentists, the dental profession knows that mercury from dental fillings washes through our suction systems when we're drilling out these fillings from your teeth, and it is a major contributor to mercury pollution in our oceans and our food chain. Now, some research indicates that the mercury that comes out of the filling doesn't do you any harm, but there's also a lot of research that shows there are possible health risks associated with these traditional metal amalgam fillings. And this is because the mercury leaches out, and also the mercury releases as a mercury vapor from the filling when the filling gets warm. So if you eat, you have a hot drink, you're brushing your teeth, that creates friction, same as clenching and chewing. And this is a fact that's not denied by the dental profession. They accept that the mercury gases out of your filling, but they don't accept that it can cause or does any issues to your health. But there are a lot of research papers that show that it does. So you've got to do your research here, and you need to look at all the pros and cons. But given the fact that mercury gases out at normal body temperatures and under normal everyday to-day things, what do you think happens when it gets drilled under very high friction with a drill that's going around at 200,000 revolutions a minute? I'm sorry if the thought of that is a little bit scary and overwhelming, but I'm trying to get across here that when we're drilling on that tooth, what happens is mercury gases out at really high levels when you touch that filling with a dental drill. And so I think we should be doing this more safely, that we should be looking at using safety measures to make sure you and me and my team don't get exposed to mercury at the time we drill these fillings out, because the toxicity of mercury has been really well documented. Look, we can argue about dental amalgam and we can argue about mercury, but the fact is mercury is a toxic heavy metal, and if we're exposing you and ourselves and the environment to that while we're doing dentistry, we should be doing better. We should be making sure we're doing it safely. And that's why I don't want you to just rush out to the dentist, go get those fillings changed over. I want you to make sure you think about getting it replaced safely. And I'm going to link to some videos on that for you so you can find out more. But don't just take my word for it. Go and do your own research. So let's look at what the alternatives are to those amalgam fillings. So rather than offering metal amalgams, an alternative are tooth-coloured fillings called composite, and this is available and has been around a long time now, and these materials have really improved and they're very suitable to have in your back teeth. They're not only more visually appealing, but they also function better than the traditional metal amalgam fillings. Now, I believe that these new tooth-coloured composite fillings should be used for all patients who have new cavities, and that this will start to become the norm as many countries, and look at the European Union for example, they're banning the use of amalgam. But these days, many people who have mercury-containing amalgam fillings also opt to get their old fillings replaced with the composite ones. Now, this can be because they're concerned about the potential health impacts, or they simply don't like how they look, or both. Here at Evolve Dental, because we work holistically, any replacement of amalgam fillings is done following really strict protocols to minimise your exposure to mercury during the process. So if you've got old metal amalgam fillings and you're debating whether to replace them, let me give you a few reasons to do it beyond just them looking nicer. I've said it earlier, amalgam fillings contain mercury. Yes, I know, I've already said it, but how much mercury? Unfortunately, about 50% of the filling is made up of mercury, which can potentially be a health risk for some patients. And some people would just feel safer simply replacing their amalgams altogether and getting rid of them. But there are other reasons that I'm going to go into now to talk about why people want to get their amalgams replaced. Well, amalgams have a limited lifespan. Traditionally, when an amalgam filling is inserted, they're packed into the cavity that is being caused by the bacteria eating into your tooth. We clean that cavity out of the decay, and then we shape it and we push the filling into it. Now, there's no sort of permanent bonding or gluing or adhesion between the filling and your tooth, and amalgam fillings will break down over time. As it wears and it breaks down, it exposes areas of the tooth, and eventually that becomes home to harmful decay causing bacteria. So if the filling wears out, you can get decay of the tooth where it's not protected, and that problem can worsen, and if it doesn't get treated, you could require a crown to be placed on your tooth rather than just replacing the filling. Sometimes it's quite hard to detect decay around an amalgam, because if we're taking an x-ray of a 3D thing, everything's overlaid, and you can have decay behind the beam of the x-ray, hidden by the amalgam, and it's not until it extends down underneath it that we can see that there's a problem. So that's sometimes a reason for removing them as they're starting to age and break down, and not wait until we can see obvious decay. Now, your amalgam fillings, they're expected to last about 10 years, maybe a little bit more, so it's important to have your fillings checked at your routine exams and make sure they're still intact. Now, the tooth-coloured composite fillings are actually bonded to your teeth rather than just packed in, so they adhere by an adhesive to your tooth structure. So they're expected to last longer without the fear of tooth decay resulting from broken down joints around the fillings. In your mouth, you get temperature changes. It gets hot and it gets cold, and that also affects your fillings. Now, the amalgam fillings will expand and contract, and that will occur at a greater ratio than it does in your tooth. So if your tooth kind of gets hot, it expands a little bit and then it contracts again. But the filling expands and contracts a lot more. And this can be problematic because you've got a cavity, your tooth is weaker, and then you've got this filling expanding and contracting, and that can cause cracking and breaking of your teeth. And amalgam contains mercury, and that's the metal that's used in thermometers because it expands when it gets hot and it shrinks when it gets cold, and that helps us tell the temperature because the mercury is fluctuating according to how hot or how cold it is. Well, the same happens inside your tooth. So an amalgam filling is going to expand when you have a hot drink, which can cause your tooth to strain and eventually crack or fracture, and the opposite happens when you have something cold, to eat or drink, it pulls it in and it strains it the other way, and that causes your filling to contract, and that can create gaps between the tooth and the filling, which lets bacteria inside the tooth. Now, yeah, teeth are very strong, but there's only so many times they can handle these contractions and expansions. And over time, they're going to weaken. It's like if I get a piece of metal. It's pretty hard stuff. I can't pull it apart and snap it. I can bend it and it won't break. But if I bend it backwards and forwards enough times, eventually that metal becomes what we call work hardened. It becomes brittle and fragile and it fractures. Same thing happens to your tooth. So what type of filling should you get instead? Well, composite fillings. And this is a mixture of a resin, yes, that's a plastic, but you can get ones without BPA and nasties in, and ceramics, quartz and silica, which means that if it's high in those particles, it can be a very, very hard and strong filling material. And that's the type that we use here at my practice, and ones that also expand and contract the same as your tooth structure. Now, the reason that most people are going to want a tooth-coloured filling is no different to getting like Invisalign braces. They're tooth-coloured. They blend in easily and they disappear and meld into the rest of your teeth. So when you smile, when you open your mouth wide and you let out a good laugh, you can't see them. Unlike the silver amalgam fillings that are clearly visible in your mouth, the composite fillings are virtually invisible. If you've had many cavities and each is filled using amalgam, you might be a little bit shy to let people see them, and in this case you don't smile and laugh as much, and composite fillings may be just the solution for you. The composite fillings actually strengthen your tooth. They are designed to fill in the cavity, and in order to do this, they bond directly to your tooth. They interlock into the structure. So the tooth and the filling becomes one functional unit rather than something wedged in a hole. Amalgam fillings are not attached, they're not bonded, they become worn down over time, and due to their characteristics, amalgam fillings do not create a single unit with the tooth, and that can cause the problems that I've talked about with decay and breakage. When a force is applied to a tooth with a filling, the amalgam portion of the tooth remains solid and unbreakable, but the tooth gives under the force. And when the force is unevenly distributed between the tooth and the filling, that is going to cause the tooth to become damaged, cracked, and fracture under pressure. Now, composites can be used to help avoid this risk and allow for even distribution of the force along the tooth and its filling. So when you bite, forces go down into the tooth, into the root, and distribute through the jawbone the way nature has designed and intended it. So if you're thinking of replacing amalgam fillings, your health is precious and so is your teeth. Mercury-containing dental amalgam fillings were at one point the only option. It was all we had available and it was all we could fill your teeth with. This has changed. The new composite fillings are replacing this old style, and although the research is ongoing, mercury vapor is released from the amalgam fillings and it could potentially be harmful to your health, especially over an extended period of time. So if you want your teeth to look nicer and you want peace of mind that your overall health and the health and structure of your teeth will remain intact, then replacing your amalgam fillings with composite ones seems like a good choice. Now, whether you choose to undergo replacement for cosmetic purposes, to protect your health, or to enjoy greater comfort, then replacing your old amalgam fillings with composite ones is a step to reaching those goals. Make sure you have the fillings removed safely. Now, that would take a fair bit to explain here, and I've actually got to get back to work seeing patients, so why don't you check out this video if you want to replace your amalgam fillings and enhance your smile, because this will explain it more here for you. Better go.